One of the things I was primarily curious about when driving the Toyota FJ was actually what it would be like without the most obvious motor swap, because of course you can get a massive amount of power out of this thing, but I really was curious to see what could you do to it on that standard motor. Standard of course being a fairly relative term, and as far as the transmission, I decided, just for the sake of a bit of fun, to leave that more so on the standard end of things, so I've just got the 4-speed to work with, to give it kind of that sort of chunky, old school rally raid sort of vibe. Well, as it turns out, it's a lot of fun. Now of course this is a legendary vehicle, so you can only buy it occasionally. Naturally you can buy it at the moment, but you need to buy one or a couple of them while you can before it cycles back around again for future reference. It's 44 grand in the legendary dealer, so that could well go up or down a little bit, but it's not really like a 250 LM or something that's going to go crazy on value anytime soon. At least I wouldn't have thought so. So it is pretty affordable, much like vehicles like the Citroen DS21 and a couple of other classics as well. It's as affordable as you would hope it would be. It's a legendary car in its own way, but it's not going to break the bank. Speaking of not breaking things, it's also not going to break the point level, because it's only 305 in standard form. Now fully built on rally tyres with that standard transmission, but everything else modified on the original engine, you're looking at more like 500 points, or just over, about 503 in the case of the exact car that I'm using here. And at that level, you've dropped the weight from the standard 1610, a lot more than the vehicle looks, I would say. It doesn't look like that heavy of a car. 1.6 ton is reasonably heavy. That's like SLR McLaren territory, which for a vehicle that looks like, well, a tin can with big wheels on it, basically, that's a lot more than I would have assumed. Visually speaking, I would argue it looks more like the kind of car that would weigh about 1200 kilos. And funnily enough, that's pretty much exactly what you can drop it to, down to 1191. Again, there will be a difference depending on if you do the modified engine or the original engine. That is the weight with said original engine. And in terms of power, you're probably curious whether or not you should bother with the motor swap. Of course, it would be more powerful, but the question is how much. In standard form, it's got 128 horsepower, fully built, 415. So it's got some classic charm, I would say. A decent oversized engine in a vehicle which looks very military coded, certainly very Jeep-esque. And that of course brings us to the obvious question of how does it actually compare to said Willys Jeep. That one also has a crazy motor swap up around 1,000 horses. You can radically change it visually speaking. I will definitely say you can make the Jeep look a lot more different in fully built form versus standard form compared to this car. In fact, this has one of possibly the most boring wide bodies in the game. It changes almost nothing about the car. It doesn't even look really any wider, and that's with a side-by-side comparison. You can quite clearly see just how minimal of a difference the wide body kit actually makes, which I think really is a shame, because having this thing with some nice big like dark grey extended arches on the side, it would look really cool on the car, especially with bigger chunkier wheels. In terms of performance though, well, I've got the mid-range turbo on this particular car, which of course gives you a bit more of that torque punch. Not quite as powerful, there's only a few horsepower difference between the high range and the mid-range, but still I thought, you know what, for a rally car you're probably, especially with a 4-speed gearbox, going to be more so in that sort of rev range. On the one hand it's bogging down a little bit too much, but then you're kind of hitting the limiter. It might be best not to do what I did here, which is to have the standard gearbox with 400 horsepower. It can be done, but it definitely feels like you need more gears, or at the very least longer gears, and maybe even a high range instead of a mid-range to really get the best out of the car. And of course, if you really want to get the best out of it, just give it a way more powerful engine, I guess. But for those who do prefer the original motor, maybe you don't want to drop the huge cash, maybe by the time you're watching this review it's gone from the legendary dealership, you only bought one of them, and you don't want to fit a motor swap that you then can't take out without spending even more cash to do so. So whatever your circumstance might be, I would say that you almost don't need to do the motor swap on this car. In the case of, again, comparing it to the Jeep, I actually find this a more pleasant car to work with, to be honest. The Jeep is a very charming car. Of course, it's the granddaddy of all these kind of cars, really, but by my standards, I would say that the Willys gets, well, more than a bit squirrely in the higher levels of horsepower, and it's a bit weird as well, because you've got all that power. It doesn't really do too much with it in terms of top-end speed, and I know it's not the most aerodynamic of things, but even so, when you've got 1,000 horses, you should have a better top speed than that car ends up having. It's fine for what it is, but it's not the kind of car that you ever really need to use at the 1,000 horsepower level with any kind of success. In my opinion, fully built with 400 horses, that feels about right. And if you think about it, even by rally raid standards, like modern standards or Dakar kind of stuff, 400 horses, that wouldn't sound too bad in those vehicles anyway. So for me, again, it's a pretty simple one to review. It's the kind of car where, if I recall correctly, again, we already knew it was coming because of the data mining list. It's one of those where if you're a Forza player, you've already had it for quite a long time, so you're probably thinking, yeah, okay, we've got that one in there now. Maybe you loved it in Forza, I don't know. For me, I find it a good car in the lower classes for the Forza games, but not necessarily a go-to for me. Here in Gran Turismo, I could see it very much falling into a similar vein, wherein you could use it maybe occasionally if you fancy a bit of a change, but not necessarily the kind of car that you're going to be using all the time unless you specifically want to. It's a nice little piece of history, definitely justified in being in the Legends dealer. And of course, with my thoughts on this car closing out, as always, I would love to hear yours down below, positive or negative about the car. Maybe it's your, I don't know, favourite car in the game now or something for certain people. There are only, of course, 2 cars left to talk about. Next up, we're going to talk about the Toyota RAV4 tomorrow, and then finally, of course, the Spirit 12R Mazda Roadster. So I'll see you then for those, and for now, thanks for watching.